From the office of the company left to me by my father, I gazed down upon the city at dusk. Through the windows of the high-rise buildings, the orange-painted sky and the bustling crowd below appear minuscule. My name is Jessica Hansen. I'm 28 years old. My father, Richard Hansen, built this company from scratch, but a year ago, he suddenly passed away. Since then, my stepmother Dorothy and stepsister Lauren have cast dark shadows over my life. After earning my master's degree in business administration from Stanford University, I joined my father's company, rising to the top of the marketing department with my inherent creativity and execution skills. I continued my father's legacy, contributing to the company's development. However, rumors have reached me that Dorothy and Lauren are influencing the board to threaten my position. The atmosphere within the company has gradually begun to change. Executives who were once supportive are now keeping their distance. My father Richard married Dorothy when I was 25. They met at a charity party. Dorothy, then 45 years old, captured 57-year-old Richard's heart with her beauty and intelligence. Having lost his wife 15 years earlier and raised me, his only daughter, Richard may have seen a chance for a second life in Dorothy's elegance and thoughtfulness. Jessica, we are going to have a new family member, my father announced, just 3 months after meeting Dorothy. At that moment, I felt uncomfortable. The decision felt way too hasty. However, seeing my father happy for the first time in a long while, I could only nod in agreement. Dorothy had a daughter, Lauren, a year younger than me. Initially, Lauren was reserved and even friendly. "Can I call you sister?" she asked, and I thought to open my heart to her. The first few months after the marriage were peaceful. Dorothy played the perfect wife, making Richard happy. Family dinners were frequent, and on the surface it seemed like an ideal family. However, changes gradually began to appear. First, Dorothy started showing interest in managing the company. "I want to lessen your burden," she would say, gradually attending important meetings. Richard, moved by his wife's dedication, began to heed her opinions. At the same time, Dorothy's behavior at home started to shift. Her words towards me began to contain subtle barbs, and she overtly favored Lauren. "Jessica, you're old enough to have your own home, aren't you? It seems Lauren understands your father's company better than you do," she would casually remark. Richard's health began to deteriorate 2 years after their marriage. He collapsed from a sudden heart attack and was forced to spend a week in the hospital. After that, he continued to work while repeatedly being hospitalized. Every time my father was hospitalized, Dorothy showed devoted care. However, I noticed documents requiring my father's signature being brought into his hospital room. And then, on a peaceful spring day a few months later, my father passed away. That morning, I had received a call from him. "I have some time this evening?" His voice sounded tired. "Would you like to talk? Just the two of us." "Of course, Dad. Shall we meet at our usual restaurant at 6 in the evening?" "Yes, let's do that." However, that promise was never fulfilled. At 3 p.m., during a board meeting, Richard suddenly clutched his chest and collapsed. When the arrival of the ambulance was announced, I was running down from the conference room on the upper floor. By the time I arrived at the hospital, it was too late. The doctor explained that it was a severe myocardial infarction. He never regained consciousness. I sat alone in my father's hospital room, holding his cold hand, reminiscing about our conversation that morning. What was he going to talk about? A week after my father's funeral, Dorothy, Lauren, and I gathered at the office of Joseph Anderson, my father's lawyer, for the inheritance proceedings. In the reception room, Dorothy, Lauren, and I sat down. Lawyer Anderson looked perplexed as he reviewed the documents. "This is odd," he said, frowning. Mr. Richard Hansen had mentioned that he had drafted a will. "A will?" Dorothy exclaimed in surprise. "I wasn't aware of it." Lawyer Anderson nodded gravely. "Yes. Actually, 2 months ago, when I met with Mr. Richard Hansen, he mentioned finalizing his will, especially concerning the succession of the company. But," he quietly said, We haven't found the will in his study safe nor the company's safe. We've searched everywhere we could," Dorothy added, giving the impression of being a bit too hasty. "That's strange," Lawyer Anderson murmured, tilting his head. Mr. Richard Hansen was meticulous about his documents. He always kept a record of where important documents were stored. "My father was quite ill towards the end," I said. "Perhaps he didn't manage to prepare everything in time." "You are probably right," Dorothy continued hastily. "Yes, that might be it. Unfortunately, it looks like we'll have to proceed with the legal inheritance process." However, Lawyer Anderson's expression was not clear. Actually, he chose his words carefully. Mr. Richard Hansen had discussed the will in quite specific terms, especially. Just then, Dorothy stood up abruptly. "Excuse me, Mr. Anderson, but it's clear there is no will, right? Discussing it further when it doesn't exist." Her strong tone made Lawyer Anderson falter for a moment. "Yes, well, that's true," he conceded. I silently watched the exchange between them. There was a sense of urgency in Dorothy's demeanor. Suddenly, I recalled the unusual events on the day of my father's death. At the funeral, she had gone to my father's study alone. After about an hour, she returned as if nothing had happened. I was too engulfed in grief at the time to notice. But now, the strange behavior of that moment nagged at me. What had she been doing in my father's study? In the end, the inheritance proceedings moved forward without the will. However, my father's last words still haunted me. "I want to talk, just the two of us. I have something important to tell you." What was he going to say that day? Why had the will disappeared? This was no coincidence. My intuition was screaming it. A few days later, a general assembly was held at the company. Many employees reminisced about Richard Hansen's contributions. Yet, a dark shadow had already crept in. In her speech, Dorothy declared, "I will continue my husband's legacy and protect the company." The words struck a discordant note with me. The words my father wanted to convey at the end, the will that should have remained, had all been prepared for this moment. Soon after, rapid changes began within the company. Dorothy's influence in the boardroom increased, and she accelerated efforts to place her daughter Lauren in key positions. It was only a year after my father's death, and as time passed, I was unable to gather any information about her suspicious actions. One Wednesday afternoon, while preparing for an important board meeting, I overheard an unexpected conversation in the women's restroom. Just after I had entered a stall, Dorothy and Lauren came in. "Getting rid of Jessica's position is so easy. The board does whatever we say." Dorothy's voice carried an unfathomable chill. "But her marketing department is performing well, especially the Pendleton account, which accounts for 30% of the company's revenue." Lauren expressed concern. A hint of a guilty conscience could be heard in her voice. Then Dorothy's voice dropped suddenly. I instinctively pressed my ear against the wall to catch her words. "It doesn't matter. I've hidden the will, and I've already disposed of everything in Richard's study safe. Jessica has no evidence. The company is ours now." "But that's..." "She." "Be quiet," Dorothy snapped sharply. "Richard was foolish to leave such a will. But don't worry, I have a plan. We'll finalize the plan to remove Jessica at next week's board meeting." After they left, I was trembling. The business and legacy my father had desperately protected were in peril. My reflection in the restroom mirror was pale and bloodless. That night, I decided to consult with Nathan Fisher, a trusted colleague from my father's era and my mentor in the marketing department. We dined together at a high-end restaurant, where I detailed the conversation I had overheard. "If the will is indeed hidden, that's a serious legal violation," Nathan said seriously. "I knew your position was precarious." He took a sip of wine before continuing. "Actually, there's also information that Dorothy has been quietly buying up company shares. Lately, she's been in frequent contact with the brokerage firm. That means..." "Yes, Jessica. Dorothy is plotting something. She's planning to oust you and install her daughter Lauren. She has used similar tactics in the past to take over her previous husband's company. His words brought back memories of my father. After his first hospital discharge, I sensed he was troubled by something. One rare night, just the two of us had dinner together. "Jessica, I may have made a mistake," Richard had said quietly. Before I could delve deeper into the true intentions behind his words, Dorothy returned home earlier than expected, cutting our conversation short. That became the last genuine conversation I had with my father. Looking back, I should have probed deeper into his true feelings at that time. By the time he decided to speak to me again, it was already too late. "My intuition was right," I said quietly. "However," Nathan added, "Dorothy's plan has a fatal flaw. She underestimates the law. If we exploit that..." I resolved to fight. "I won't let them take what my father built," I declared, with a sense of strength and pride inherited from my father. That night, an unexpected visitor arrived. It was Sandra Thompson, my father's former secretary. She had supported my father for over 30 years. Her expression mixed relief from years of pressure with new fears. After my father's death, Sandra had suddenly taken a leave of absence, citing health reasons, but the truth was different. "Actually, I was threatened by Mrs. Dorothy Hanson," Sandra confessed, sitting down heavily at the desk. "Right after Mr. Hanson passed away, she came to my home. That day, Dorothy had brought information about a job offer for Sandra's son, who had been struggling to find employment. 'You care about your son's future, don't you?' Dorothy had whispered sweetly, holding an appointment letter from a major company in her hand. 'However, there is a condition. As Richard's secretary, you know a lot of confidential information. From now on, I need you to keep quiet about such matters.' But that wasn't all," Sandra continued. "I received monitoring calls almost weekly, and suspicious cars lingered around my house. I had to remain silent, fearing something might happen to my son. But I can't stay silent anymore," Sandra stated with determination. "Mr. Richard Hanson trusted me with important information. It's time to honor that trust." "Miss, I have something you need to see," she said, presenting an old diary. It belonged to my father. The leather-bound diary was worn at the corners. It contained entries about my father's anxieties after marrying Dorothy. I blame myself for not seeing her true nature. I should have investigated her past marriages and business reputation. I must protect Jessica. She is the only person who understands and can carry on my ideals. The words in the notes, especially those written during his hospital stay, struck a chord. I may not have long left. I couldn't stop Dorothy. "Jessica, if this diary ever reaches you, please forgive my weakness. Until the end, your father was concerned about you, miss. He entrusted me to pass this to you if something happened to him. Yet, I was threatened by Mrs. Dorothy Hanson not to hand over anything from Mr. Richard Hanson. I was too scared. I'm sorry for the delay," Sandra said, tears shimmering in her eyes. "I too should have noticed Mrs. Dorothy Hanson's ambitions earlier." That night, I read through my father's diary repeatedly. It was filled with his emotions: joy, anguish, and regret, all vividly recorded. Particularly poignant were the words written on my birthday. "Today, Jessica turns 5. Just seeing her smile makes all my fatigue vanish. For her, I must live honestly and earnestly." Wiping away tears, I renewed my resolve. This was not merely a struggle for control of a company. This was a fight to protect my father's ideals and his way of living. 3 nights later, with the help of Nathan and Sandra, I stepped into my father's study. That night, Dorothy and Lauren were at a charity party, not expected to return until late. The study, largely untouched since my father's death, was illuminated by moonlight. "Jessica." Nathan paused in front of a bookshelf. Richard was meticulous. There must be some record. We began searching. Sandra at the desk drawers, Nathan at the bookshelves, and I near the safe. My father was known to regularly organize the contents of the safe. There had to be a record somewhere. "This is it," Nathan exclaimed, pulling out an old file. It was a supply management notebook my father had used for years. Flipping through, we found a detailed list of the safe's contents. The latest entry was just before my father first fell ill. Important documents including the will, stock certificates, company founding documents. My hands trembled. Indeed, the will had existed. However, now the safe was empty. But this alone isn't enough. I furrowed my brows. At that moment, Sandra stood up decisively. Perhaps this could be conclusive evidence. She pulled out her smartphone. I haven't been able to show this email to anyone for a year, Sandra said, her fingers trembling as she operated the device. I was scared to think what might happen if Mrs. Dorothy Hanson found it among important documents. I read it once and then saved it on an old device. But I can't continue to betray Mr. Richard Hanson's wishes any longer. The sender was my father. The date was early in the morning on the day he died. Sandra, I plan to meet with Jessica this evening. There are documents I want to give her. Just in case, I want you to also know where the copies of these documents are. The email included the location of a copy of the will. It was tucked away in the corner of the bookshelf, hidden inside my father's old diary. Found it. We carefully opened the diary. Indeed, there was a copy of my father's will sandwiched inside, dated 2 days before his death. It outlined the ownership of the company, the transfer of control to me, and the reasons for it. The diary also contained warnings about Dorothy. This is definitive evidence, Nathan said, his face lighting up. This proves that the will indeed existed. But that wasn't all. A thorough search of the study also turned up evidence of Dorothy's wrongdoing. My father's diary noted how she had forced him to sign documents she had brought in. The difference between the safe's inventory list and its current contents pointed to clear evidence of tampering. And then, the records of stock transactions. My father had been secretly tracking Dorothy's illicit dealings. 1 week later, a board meeting was convened. I arrived fully prepared, dressed in a dark blue suit and wearing the pearl necklace my father had given me. I entered the meeting room, where Dorothy wore her usual smug smile. But today, I had my father's support. The agenda for today is about the reorganization of the marketing department. The chairman began. Dorothy smiled contentedly. Before that, I stood up. I would like you all to see this. The screen in the meeting room displayed detailed evidence. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, I began in a steady voice. I have gathered you here today to present significant evidence of illegal activities. The screen showed one piece of evidence after another. The email from my father to Sandra, the inventory list from the safe, the records of Dorothy's stock transactions. All of it pointed to her illegal activities. This is fabricated. Dorothy raised her voice. You made these up. But then, the door to the meeting room opened, and Lauren walked in, holding an envelope. Let's stop the lies, Mom. Lauren's voice trembled. This is the will you hid. The room fell silent. Dorothy's face drained of color. Lauren, you. I saw it, Lauren said, tears welling up. That day, after Mr. Richard collapsed, I saw you taking documents from the study. The will extracted from the envelope clearly stated my father's intentions. The ethos of this company lies in honesty and integrity. Only those who understand and can implement these principles should run it. My daughter Jessica has embodied this spirit since she was a child. The company rightfully belongs to her. Lauren continued. The ownership of the company belonged to Richard, and the right of inheritance is clearly stated to belong to Jessica, his blood relative. Dorothy, your actions are a clear violation of the law. The room erupted into chaos. It was now clear that the company and all rights to it would be transferred to me. Dorothy slumped into her chair. I admit it. Her voice was hoarse. I hid the will. Murmurs arose among the directors. The evidence was perfect. At last my father's final wishes were brought to light. Jessica. Lauren called out to me as we were leaving. "I'm sorry. I should have spoken about the truth sooner." I nodded quietly. "Thanks to your courage, Lauren, we were able to show everyone my father's true intentions." The developments that followed were swift. An emergency board meeting was convened, and Dorothy's illegal activities were formally recognized. She was expelled from the board and legal proceedings were decided. She was charged with securities law violations, and during the trial, her past misconduct was revealed one after another. The prosecution presented evidence that she had attempted to take over 2 companies using similar methods in the past. In the case of her first husband's company, she tried to take control by buying shares under the guise of an anonymous investor but failed. The second time, she attempted the same with a partner's company but was not prosecuted due to insufficient evidence. The defendant's actions are clearly antisocial. The prosecutor sternly pointed out. Moreover, she betrayed the trust of the late Richard Hansen, engaging in illegal activities within just a year of his death. Throughout the trial, Dorothy's true character gradually came to light. Raised in a wealthy family, she developed an abnormal obsession with wealth and power following her father's bankruptcy. Her first marriage was also motivated by her partner's assets. Particularly shocking was the testimony about the truth behind Richard's death. Sandra, the former secretary, took the stand and disclosed crucial facts. On the day Mr. Richard Hansen fell ill, Mrs. Dorothy Hansen was unusually restless from the morning. Sandra recounted with a trembling voice, and just before Mr. Richard Hansen collapsed, she was muttering to herself, "I need to get these documents signed today." Although this testimony did not directly prove causality, it vividly illustrated Dorothy's character. The judgment was harsh. A 5-year prison sentence. The judge stated, "The defendant's actions have shaken the foundation of a business society based on trust." In prison, Dorothy lost all her former dignity. I visited her once. She spoke frankly, without pretense. "I have always lived my life striving to climb higher." Her voice was hoarse. "When my family went bankrupt, I was just 10. Since then, I believed that money and power were everything. But you had a daughter you loved." I challenged, but Dorothy smirked bitterly. "Lauren?" "Yes, indeed. But I only saw her as a tool to fulfill my ambitions. She knew that, and that's why she drifted away from me. She doesn't visit me." Lauren had separated from her mother and started her own small company. One day she contacted me. We met in a hotel lounge. Being face to face with my former stepsister, she confined. "I want to change too," Lauren said. "Like you. I want to build something on my own. I want to step out from under my mother's shadow and live honestly." I smiled and responded, "Everyone has that opportunity. The important thing is to live honestly. That's the most important lesson my father taught me." New challenges awaited me. Many executives under Dorothy's influence announced their resignations, plunging the company into temporary chaos. However, this crisis brought new opportunities. I promoted capable young employees, including many who had been neglected by Dorothy. Thus, I continued my father's legacy and began to build a new management structure. Nathan remained by my side as my right-hand man, continuously contributing to the company's development. Most importantly, a new wind of hope began to blow within the company. A year later, the company recorded its highest performance ever. Now, a picture of my father hangs in my office. "Dad, our company is safe. It wasn't revenge we needed, but to build a better future," I said, smiling at his photo.